Good afternoon. It is Friday, April 10th, 2020, and today is Good Friday, heading into Easter weekend. I'm Mahan Mirza, Executive Director of the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion at the University of Notre Dame. Welcome to our online conversation series titled Engaged, Religion and the Common Good. We're introducing this in the midst of the COVID-19 global pandemic. When you think of global engagement with religion while sitting here in the United States, we tend to think of places maybe like Africa or Asia, Europe, Latin America. We forget that Indiana is also part of the globe. So what better place to begin these conversations than in our own neighborhood of South Bend? As we get started, we invite you to join the conversation by visiting our website or following us on Twitter at AnsariUND. Also, feel free to email us comments or suggestions for future topics and guests. We're delighted to be engaged today with Pastor Carl Hetler from the Broadway Christian Parish of the United Methodist Church. Welcome to this series, Pastor Carl.
Thank you, Mahan. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're honored to have you as one of our first guests, and today is Good Friday. So how has your day been?
Good. In the Good Friday tradition, Christians often remember the last steps of Jesus in the Stations of the Cross. And so we spent the day with some members and other community leaders walking around our neighborhood, keeping physical distance from each other, but taking time to pray throughout our city this morning.
Well, that's quite incredible. How did you, how many people were there, and how did you manage to keep distance?
There were just four of us,
Okay.
Some of our lay leaders, another pastor from the South Side. And so we had a printed program, and so we couldn't always hear each other because of the cold and the wind, but we were there together and able to do that without any contact.
Well, I know your community has been deeply engaged with the neighborhood, and we'd like to hear more about that. But maybe first tell us a little bit about your own background and journey of faith.
Yeah, I've only been serving at Broadway for the past 2 years. They have a history for decades of serving their community. But I grew up in a similar setting out in Berkeley, California, which also has a very large homeless population, and was involved with a church there that cared for people in the name of Jesus. And my studies took me to Chicago, where I was involved with homeless ministries and work there in Chicago and Evanston, Illinois. And meeting my wife there, who's from the Michiana area. We've bounced back and forth between the Midwest and California, but we've been here in South Bend now for the past 10 years. And so I've had the opportunity to serve in a number of churches here locally, to build a lot of community connections, and have been honored to be able to serve and be a part of this community that's one very similar to what I grew up in, and other experiences I've had of people who are trying to live out their faith. And as this series will look at, bring together their religious belief with seeking the common good.
Wonderful. Well, you know, I think it's greatly enriched the community to have you here. And one of my first contacts with you was just a few months ago, or actually last semester, when we were trying to just start up the Ansari Institute and reach out to the community. And we invited you for the Sultan and the Saint program. And you told me a little bit about your community, and I followed up, and I was just blown away by what you're doing here in the neighborhood. So I'd like to share the website just so people can see. There's Pastor Carl and the Broadway Christian Parish. And as you scroll through this website, there's news about what's going on, and most recently the community has been partnering with the city on the 2020 census. There's the food pantry, and when I visited on, it was a Thursday morning, just incredible how many people were there being served in the hospitality room. And I learned that the community provides not only food but also counseling for people who have various kinds of needs. And then people can come in and get a hot shower. And I think the morning I came was particularly frigid, as it is right now. We're in April, but we're still in the 30s today. And there's a Sunday dinner where other communities from other faiths even volunteer, where you have a banquet style dinner and anyone can attend. Obviously, there's spiritual education and then special programs during the holidays, and even a garden commemorating members of the community who have passed. So this is an incredible, I just thought it was an incredible community, and we'd like to hear more. Would you like to highlight any aspect of this work for us? How are the partnerships with the city working out? Maybe we can start there.
Yeah, and I think um, yeah, at the top of the page on the website, it has information about online meetings, and it's been something we've had to do during this crisis is provide online ways for people to connect, to still remain physically distant. And I know some congregations are making headlines for disobeying that and putting people, their members in the community at risk. But we have really embraced and we're at the forefront of stopping gatherings that could be replicated online. And although it's difficult not being able to hug and give handshakes to one another, we found a lot of success in recreating community online and even being able to include people who are marginalized in that community also. And so one of the debates we had recently on that topic was, should we use a password protection for our online meetings? Because some people hear reports about strangers dropping in and saying inappropriate things in gatherings, whether it's religious or vocational meetings on Zoom.
It's called Zoom bombing.
Right. But we talked about how at Broadway, we have always been an open place. And we have had situations on Sunday mornings when we physically gather where people will come in and disturb things and say inappropriate things. But because we believe in radical hospitality, we open ourselves up to that. And we're prepared to deal with that. And so we've continued that, publicizing how people can join us online. And if they want to disrupt things, we have ways to help diffuse the situation and calm people down. But it's part of that radical belief that God's love should be extended to all people. And Broadway's done it for decades of caring for people. And as you highlight on the webpage, there's a lot of different physical ministries that we continue to provide because there's no way to do those things online. That there are people in our community who are still hungry. And so we're serving between 80 and 90 people every Monday through Thursday that we are open. And there's still people on these cold days who need a warm shower, who need a change of clothes. And we're still providing that. And there's still both homeless people and people in our Southeast community and across Michiana who are running out of food. And so our food pantry continues to serve 10 to 25 people every those 4 days we're open, Monday through Thursday. And so it's all that belief in radical hospitality and putting ourselves on the front lines to serve and care for others. Now, we found effective ways to do that following health guidelines. We've removed half the chairs in our hospitality area so that people are separated and distant, and we have a waiting area where people can wait until there's a space open for them to eat. We have a more aggressive disinfecting and cleaning that we're doing to make sure that we are wiping down areas repeatedly that are commonly touched, that we are helping people sanitize their hands. And we are also disinfecting after each guest leaves the place where they were at. And so we found ways to try to minimize the spread and to try to keep people healthy. But it's not just something that we've done as paid staff and as a church, but it's this radical hospitality that doesn't just serve people in vulnerable ways, but invites them in to participate. And so the whole reason that we're able to stay open is because Broadway over the years has created this community of people who care for one another, where many of the guests who are homeless, who are sheltered, have been equipped and empowered and validated to serve alongside paid staff and outside volunteers. And we've had to depend on that as we have less staff who are healthy enough to work, as we have 0 volunteers who are coming from the community because most are over the age of 60. And so we have an amazing thing that happens even now in the midst of this virus and illness, where guests are helping serve food. They are sanitizing their hands. They are bringing food to each person at their seat so they don't have to get up and wait in line. They are helping stock the food pantry and deliver food to people who are in need. They're helping clean up. They're helping disinfect the showers after each use. And so our guests are involved. And it's also not just something that we've created at Broadway, but something that we've extended throughout the city of South Bend, that we're part of a network. We do Monday through Thursdays, but there's a different group that serves breakfast the rest of the week and a different place that does lunches and dinners. And so we've networked together and shared best practices and helped care for each other. And we've developed partnerships. Our newest thing is the South Bend Venues, Parks, and Arts is delivering hand washing stations that we will have outside on both sides of our building so that people, as they're coming and going, can effectively wash their hands, and they're helping manage our resources. So there's a partnerships that we have within our community involving people, and then in the broader South Bend community also, that really rely on this radical hospitality that God offers to us and puts it into practice.
This is simply remarkable and so inspiring, especially the idea of radical hospitality that you spoke of. It seems like the community had already built up a kind of resilience because of what the community was doing just as a part of everyday life. And so you're prepared to deal with something like this without having to completely rethink who they are. And it makes me think also about a kind of middle ground. So on the one hand, you have some religious communities that might say, God will take care of everything. We don't have to socially distance. And all of this is maybe even some kind of conspiracy, you know, they'll reject whatever the scientists are telling us and go about their lives and business as usual. And there are others who will shut down and not know how to function. And then I did notice where you had the Zoom link for your meetings, and it occurred to me that how are they going to protect from the Zoom bombing? Don't they know that you're not supposed to post these things public? But now I understand. And I'm sure you haven't had anyone disruptive come in yet. Unfortunately, a lot of that is happening, you know, is kind of racism, xenophobia against it's anti-Semitic or against minority groups. So, but if something like that happens, it'd be interesting to see, you know, how it's diffused online. Now, when you speak about community, maybe I can ask you to elaborate. You said we have community partners. How do you define that community?
Right, and so there's multiple levels of that. For those who are in our faith tradition, we share spiritual experiences. So for example, the crosswalk I mentioned this morning had other Christian pastors who are a part of that because we have that shared spiritual experience. And so it's centered within the Christian faith, and we do things specifically with other congregations, both United Methodist. There is 11 United Methodist congregations across South Bend. And so we've built up partnerships with many of them to do those faith experiences together. We also have broader Christian groups. There's a group of pastors that I've started organizing who meet every month on the southeast side to pray for one another and to share their concerns. And so across different denominations, but still within that Christian faith, we share our time together. Even then more broadly, when we get outside of the particular one faith, there's different faiths then that we find similar common good that we can do. You mentioned the Sunday dinner, where we have different religious groups, secular work volunteer programs who come in and serve those Sunday dinners. And it's been a beautiful way that we think about the common good and the level of commonality that we have that allows us to share together. And so we're a part of groups like Faith in St. Joe County that works across different faith traditions and those with no faith tradition to simply seek the goodwill and empower people who've been marginalized and victimized. And we can find common issues that we can work on. And actually, I think that was the first place we actually met before the Ansari Institute, was when there was the meeting about using some of the Gemini apartments for money for improvement for vouchers. And it was that place where I think where we first met. And as we talked about, and I think you're probably hopefully okay with me saying, you know, there's some conflict there about the extent to radical hospitality. And can we welcome people who are in need of shelter, people who are in need of drug addiction and mental health services? Can we welcome them into our own neighborhoods and communities? And that's a radical thing, and is something that can be uncomfortable, and something that we all have to work through. How do we do that with input and transparency from our government officials, as I think you've argued for? And so there's challenges there, and it's not always easy, and there can be tension there.
Right.
We continue to
No,
work together and partner.
I do remember that. And um, I think our encounter there was fleeting and very quick.
Right.
But I felt like this is a man I need to get to know because of your contributions in that meeting and just how you carried yourself. So I very much appreciated getting to know you a little bit better and learning from you and being inspired by the things you do. Speaking about just sticking with this radical hospitality a little bit and transparency. When we look at overall, how programs work, sometimes even in South Bend, communities are segregated. You have the South and the West side, and then you have the North and the Northeast side, and there's wealth disparity. And so a larger political question is, when we provide for these basic needs of people just to give them dignity and subsistence, how do we at the same time work to change the system in a way so that it doesn't perpetuate this? And going a little bit deeper, when we stabilize something that is systemically unjust, are we inadvertently supporting a system that should otherwise be changed more radically? I wonder what your thoughts on this.
Right, and especially in the time of this virus and the incredible, not just death toll it's taking, but also the economic impact. People talk about when we will return to normal. And myself and others have suggested that maybe we don't want to go back to the normal, to all the injustices and inequalities that our society has been experiencing. And that one of the things that may come out of this is the opportunity to reconsider and to refashion a society that has more economic justice, that has more healthcare equality for all people, so that the next pandemic is handled differently. And so we're already in conversations now to think about how will we rebuild that. But I think it starts now with practicing some of that radical hospitality. And it's why Broadway remains open, so that those who are marginalized, so that those who are often overlooked still are getting the help and services that they need. And so myself and others are putting ourselves out at risk because it's an essential service that we want to care for people, and we're willing to make those sacrifices and risk our own health to start practicing that now. And hopefully out of that will come efforts to be able to help rebuild society and restart businesses and to restart interactions that pursue that. We've worked very closely with the mayor's office, who's been very proactive to work on something such as a quarantine site for those who are homeless or in shelters, for people who, when they test positive or display symptoms, can't isolate themselves, can't quarantine because they have no physical house to go to. And so the mayor has been working very hard over the last month and is getting ready on this Friday, April 12th, to announce something soon in the coming days about a quarantine site that'll be confidential, that will be in agreement with an ownership group who owns the property, that will be staffed and secure with food and health services, so we can care for people who are marginalized. And it's only because of the advocacy work and the pressure that we've put on week after week as this crisis has enveloped to make sure that those people who are often marginalized and ignored are cared for, because everyone in South Bend is important, and we have responsibility to care for them. And so we've seen the mayor's office being very responsive to that and involved, and not just in the quarantine, the initial concern we're going to have, but long term. You think about returning to normal is involved lots of testing, and that's going to have to come down from the federal government. But our mayor has a plan in place to have multiple testing sites spread throughout the city, especially in underserved neighborhoods, like on the west side, so that we will make sure that all people who are showing symptoms can get tested, and that it's not reserved simply for the wealthy or the well-connected to get those tests. And so those are some of the ways we can start now to not only care for people who are in need, but plan for the rebuilding of our society in a way that is just and equitable and treats everyone with love and compassion.
Is this the pressure that, you're talking about applying to the mayor's office and the city? Is this coming from a group of, pastoral leaders, or is it through the offices of faith in St. Joseph County?
Yeah, it's both the faith leaders, faith in St. Joe County, but then also the network that we have of homeless advocates and service providers that we meet regularly to consider needs and have been planning for this crisis and working together. And one of the things that helped us have the community partnership now this year is last winter when we had the severe polar vortex, when it was dangerous to even be outside for a couple minutes. This group of homeless and service providers came together to develop a plan with the public officials to get things like school buses to help transport guests who are in shelters to Broadway and then to other sites for meals and for services. And so we had the acute opportunity last winter to start dealing with the crisis and collaborate and work together and share resources and communicate. And that's helped us build that trust and connections so that now, as we're already a month into this, we have those relationships, that trust, and that willingness to work together. It takes a lot of time. It takes a commitment. As you and I have found, it takes going onto each other's turf to learn from each other and to be served by each other. These are the ways that we build partnerships that can handle challenges and crises, because they will continue to come.
Mm. And, when you speak about, when will things go back to normal, and then questioning that, just the premise of that, well, wait a minute, normal is not a good place for many people. And so that, kind of sentiment of going back to normal can only come from a point of privilege. And I was reading, and we had a selection of part of Andrew Yang's book it's called War on Normal People. And he says when we think people who are in maybe academia or in literate class, whose most of their friends are college educated, that's not normal. The norm, when you draw the curve, is somewhere else in America, and there's a war on normal people. That's how he phrases it. And so I think this really gives us a moment to pause and think about what we mean when we say that. Now, one of the things I'd like to ask you, so this is incredible, everything that you're talking about, work that is coming from a place of faith. And was the Ansari Institute is interested in this conversation. It's one of the reasons, I wanted to really talk to you, as engaging religion for the common good. Do you also find religious communities that are problematic, that are not cooperating, that view things from a different theological perspective, that is unhelpful? Maybe speak a little bit about that, if you could.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's some congregations in our mission area who are continuing to meet for their weekly gatherings physically, even though it's causing danger for their own members and for larger society. And so you see that locally as well as nationally, of a people who are putting their faith and belief above science and medical practice. And so it's figuring out how do we wed the two together, remain true to our own beliefs and convictions while still being rational. In the United Methodist tradition, we follow a quadrilateral of our holy scriptures that inform us, but also tradition. And we consider the tradition of United Methodism that goes back to the Anglican Church and the long history in the Roman Catholic Church before that, and their own personal experience and subjective experience that we bring, and then also reason as the fourth part. And all four of those have to balance and inform each other and reflect each other. And that has been helpful for us as United Methodists to balance that and consider those. But as you know from headlines, that's even something that's divisive within our own denomination as we debate sexuality and gender, and that there are different camps about whether that issue is important or not, and what view to take, whether conservative or progressive. And so even as United Methodists, we still argue and fracture over those issues that are more resolved in our society. I think the important thing is to consider the radical hospitality that I've mentioned, that Christians believe is personified in God coming down in human flesh, and that we remember on this Good Friday, God offering himself on a cross as a form of sacrifice, that he was convicted unjustly, he was tried unjustly, executed by the governing authorities, and that this day is a day of suffering, and remembering that God suffers with us. And so particular to the Christian tradition is this idea that God does call us also to suffer, in Jesus' words, to carry our cross. And so the radical hospitality of Broadway is living out that belief. And I think that's different for different churches. And I've been a part of lots of different types of churches. And so I think we're always challenged to consider those words of Jesus and how we are carrying our cross. And the encouragement is not just that we are called to lives of sacrifice, but there's good news that comes on Sunday morning, that God has conquered the grave, has conquered death. And for the thousands who have died already from this virus and have died from other tragedies also, that is good news. And it's good news for us who continue to live, to know that there is hope beyond this life. And that's the Christian message. It's the message that Broadway has proclaimed and lived out for decades. And it's the idea that there is a power that comes through God to allow us to serve and to care for others and continue on. And so my challenge always to other pastors who have doubts and insular is to consider the call of Jesus to carry our cross and to rely on God's power that was displayed on Easter morning to equip us to do that. The framework that I've followed with various churches is to first get involved at the financial level, to make sacrifices financially. And so churches will often, or any religious group of people can make a decision to financially support a program that cares for people who are in need. And that after making a financial commitment, challenging people to take the next step to go and serve at that place. Maybe a place like Hope Ministries or Broadway that serves a meal, to come and serve there. And then as you do that, you start to make a relational connection to people. So you go from finances to service, to then getting to know the people you're serving and to realize how much you have to learn from them, realize how much they are like you, to realize some of the larger problems that in our society have caused the plight that they are in. And then as a final level is to get connected with someone and care for someone. Because at Broadway, right now, we're serving 90 people a day. At our peak this winter, we were serving 200 a day. It's hard to get to know people in that larger setting. But when you really sit down with someone one-to-one, to get to know them and care for them, you see the worth that they have is creating God's image. You see the trauma they've experienced that causes current problems for them. You develop compassion and ability to be able to walk alongside them. And so whenever I find people who are resistant to caring for others, those are sort of the four levels I go through with them to help them move them along so that God can work in their life and so they can see how they can be used to care for others.
Well, as you were speaking about this from a deeply theological perspective, especially in this time of Easter, which I think is an appropriate place to bring us maybe to a close to this conversation. It reminded me of, the first level, the financial commitment, which has a cost. And with the theology, it reminded me of Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his cost of discipleship and the burden of carrying that cross. I think that that's a profound way to view one's faith. And so thank you for sharing that and bringing this back to the season we're in. I want to take us back to the website. As we were going through this, we came all the way. So this is the top, and you can see that if you want to support the work of the parish and what Pastor Carl is doing, you can come to his website and support them But as we go down, here's the Zoom meeting that's public. So the radical hospitality, everybody's welcome. Um, they talk about all the work that they do. And then at the bottom of the website is the mission statement. And often you see the mission statements, you know, on the top, front and center, but it's almost like the exclamation point. So everything that we're doing is encapsulated in this mission. And I'm going to read it and maybe end our conversation with the last point. So Broadway Christian Parish is a United Methodist congregation called by God to minister to the southeast neighborhood of South Bend, Indiana. Believing in the sacred and equal worth of all people, we celebrate God's grace with acts of hospitality, love, acceptance, respect, service, and advocacy. These acts are rooted in our faith in Christ, empowered by the Holy Spirit, and strengthened by our worship, which is centered on the Word and weekly celebration of the Eucharist. And so I just feel like just the website itself and then this conversation embodied the mission statement. And it's something that seems, you know, deeply internalized, and it should be a source of immense immense gratitude, I think, for the congregation that you serve. But on the last point there, maybe here where we can conclude the Eucharist. So we're heading into Easter Sunday in a couple of days. Tell us how you're adjusting. What will the service be like in this COVID era?
Well, you can see behind me, as part of a tradition after a Maundy Thursday service last night, there is the time known as Tenebrae, the stripping of the church, in recognition of the grief and remembering the death of Jesus. Everything is taken down. And so I've flipped around our banner that typically hangs in our sanctuary as a sign of stripping. And behind it, you can see peaks of the Easter banner that declares the good news of resurrection that will be displayed on Sunday morning. And so that'll be our background for Sunday morning as we gather on Zoom to use a lot of the features on this platform to be able to help create that community. And so we will have people watching on Facebook, watching our Zoom broadcast. We'll have some people without internet access who are simply on their phones calling in to partake. We will have different people reading scriptures and offering up prayers and greeting each other through Zoom. And we'll also be using the breakout room feature so that we can get into smaller groups to greet one another personally, to check in with how people are doing, to discuss and share our prayer concerns. And so using some of these technology features to be able to build that connection and community. I know churches in New York City have been encouraging members to sing a common hymn, Christ the Lord is risen today at 9 a.m. And so I've got friends in New York City who will be on their doorsteps and out their balconies singing all together. And it's opportunities like that that we have, whether out our doors or on online conversations like this, to be able to reaffirm the faith that we hold in common, to celebrate together. And so those are some of the things that we'll be doing here locally also to celebrate and remember that. And even though I can't give people a piece of bread for them to dip in grape juice or wine, we can still remember, because Jesus' final words when he had his final meal with his disciples before his betrayal was that he would look forward to eating this meal again in the kingdom with his followers. And so there is that sense in the Eucharist, that weekly communion meal that we celebrate, of looking forward, that we do it separately and individually now, but looking forward to that day when that is something that we do want to return to normal, that radical hospitality of sharing a meal of communion, and then also going downstairs to share that meal with our neighbors and our community also. And so this is a time of waiting for us still, even after Easter, when we will wait to be able to gather again, to share, to break bread and dip it in the cup, and then to go downstairs and to radically serve everyone who comes in our doors.
Well, we want to thank you, Pastor Carl, for joining us today and sharing all the wonderful work that you do with the community. And as just as you were concluding, you know, describing the banner and people on the phone, friends in New York City, you just remind me of, like, the image that was coming to mind was this river that's flowing, and COVID maybe as a barrier that just came in front of it, and you just refuse to stop. You flow around it, and you find different and carve different valleys and paths for a force that can't be stopped. So God bless you, and keep up the good work for the benefit of the community. And we'll talk to you again offline soon. Thank you for joining us.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. And for those of you who are joining us for this conversation, this is part of a series. We'll have additional conversations coming from the Ansari Institute, hosted by me and some of my colleagues. The series is Engaged, focusing on religion and the common good. You can visit us on our website, email us your thoughts and suggestions for other topics or guests, and follow us on our Twitter feed at Ansari UND. Thank you again. So long.
Take care.